All right, so welcome everybody to September's, I almost said October's, to September's Disability Inclusion webinar, part of our series for 2021. I appreciate everybody showing up today. I know I had to change the time, and so it's a little challenging. Some of you probably are going to be watching this on the replay, which is just fine. So let's get started. I want to talk today about inclusive management secrets, and as always, I want to explain why we need this webinar, although I think you already know this. So we know that many managers are taught to focus on output versus throughput. Everybody cares about results, not necessarily how you get those results. But managers are the key puzzle piece within this. They are the ones who honestly make or break disability inclusive workplaces. And a lot of them have unconscious bias, or they've been immersed in a culture that doesn't promote inclusion. So let's talk today about how we can change that. What can we do as the individuals who are coordinating disability inclusion at our companies or are helping companies who are coordinating their own disability inclusion? So a couple of quick things. As always, this webinar is being recorded. In case you didn't know that, the webinar is being recorded. So a replay that can be made to those who could not attend live, and that's the key to all of this. This webinar does sit on, the replay of this webinar does sit on my website, and therefore can be downloaded by anybody, even those folks who didn't register for it. But honestly, the replay is a courtesy to the folks who did register, because I know it's hard to make every scheduled appointment that we want to make. Our days are very busy, and sometimes it's hard to get it all in. But I want your interaction for those of you who are here today live and in person for the benefit of everybody who's going to be watching the replay. So please use the chat, the questions and answers, and the hand raising. And just in case you aren't familiar with how to use those, let's briefly go through them. So to use the chat, you want to start with the little speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, or it might be on the top of your screen. And then once you click on it, you're going to get a window like this that will allow you to click where you want to send your chat to. We prefer everyone, but you can put the private chat just to the presenters. And again, if you can select everyone, everybody benefits from that. We're going to be reading it out loud anyway, so prefer that it's in the public chat, but understand if you want it to be in the private chat. Raising your hand is a great way to interrupt me. Becca is here to, as always, assist and provide a lot of support to me through this. She can pay attention to when you're raising your hand and be able to stop me and call on you. We can call on you so that you can speak. To raise your hand, you're going to click on the thing that looks like a little smiley face, reactions, and a menu will pop up. You could clap your hands if you wanted to, but what you're really aiming for is that raise hand button at the bottom of that. And then once you're done, you no longer have your question, or if your question's been answered, please don't forget to lower your hand using that same menu. So let's talk about my objectives for today, and then I want to hear about yours. I'm so sorry. I should be introducing Becca, who is my sidekick for the day. So Becca, as always, it's either Becca or Lisa. They're here supporting me. We have a great partnership with Human Service Forum, and they have been so helpful in making sure that we have a really great webinar and allows the participation with the individuals who are able to attend live. So I'm so thankful. Thank you, Becca, for being a part of this journey with me. And we've been through this a few times now, and it's always run smoothly. So again, Becca will be monitoring the chat in case you have something you want to ask or want to type in there. She will let me know, or she'll wait for me to take a breath and then interrupt me to make sure that we get this through. Again, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So my objectives for the day are to discuss the importance of aligning performance metrics with inclusion, to show how to promote clear, effective communication channels, and to give tips on how managers can hurdle over stigma. But I'm actually interested in what your objectives are. So I would love it if you just hop into the chat for a second and type in either metrics, communication, or stigma. And again, my goals were discuss metrics, show how to promote clear communication, and give tips on hurdling stigma. I will hit all of those, but depending on what's voted on in the chat, I may change the order up or spend some more time focused on a particular area. So anything in the chat?
We have some votes on clear communication. That seems to be high on the list of things that people are interested in starting with.
Perfect. And that is actually, I won't start with it, but that is the biggest section of this webinar. So we're all aligned on this. That's perfect. Again, this is being recorded, so you don't have to take a ton of notes. You are welcome to take screenshots of what's up on your screen if you want to be able to facilitate your note taking or anything like that. But you will get an email with the replay, a link to the replay. I'll be honest, captioning these webinars has taken a little more time than I expect. So because today is Thursday, I promise you will get the webinar in the replay in your email by Monday, and it'll be captioned. And so we also have, we keep a list of all the links that are shared in this. They'll be shared in the chat, so you can click on them then, but also that will go along with the email with the replay. So let's get into it. When I create these webinars, I always want to be sure people understand why I am a person who can speak to this with some level of experience and knowledge. So I've done a lot of things in my career, but the most important thing I think was that I spent 7 years at Walgreens creating their inclusion practices to employ people with disabilities. I actually lived in South Carolina for a few months as we were kicking it off. And during those 7 years I was there, we learned a lot of lessons. This was back from 2006 to 2013, so a very long time ago. And during that time, there hadn't been any company to look at inclusion from an entire enterprise perspective. And at Walgreens, we took this seriously and said, we're going to figure out how to do this right. And so we are going to start with our distribution centers, because that's where our leadership and our champions had control. And then we'll move over to the stores, because that's actually where the most opportunity was for people with disabilities. So as I said, I was there for 7 years, started with the distribution centers, figured out how to do it well, how to employ people with disabilities in a way that made sense to the company and to the employees, including the employees with disabilities. There were a lot of lessons learned there, and I was able to then take those lessons learned and apply them to the retail component of the company, which was different than the distribution centers, the way we approached employing people with disabilities there. And then when I left Walgreens, I went on to help many companies employ people with disabilities, figuring out how to make it work for their company. And that's the key. So I know most of you who are watching this webinar are working for companies that are considering disability inclusion, or you've already got it and you think it can get better. So I'm hoping that these webinars really assist you with those sorts of things. I also know that some of the people who attend these webinars are people who help companies get into these efforts. So I appreciate those individuals on here as well, because you're the ones who can pass on this message. The more companies we can get to be comfortable with employing people with disabilities and understanding how to do it, the more people with disabilities will get jobs. So I'm going to start with aligning metrics with inclusion, because I think that is the most important part, that it is the briefest part of this presentation. What's key to helping managers be inclusive managers is to understand what motivates them. And I don't know any manager who doesn't have metrics they have to meet. Most of our workers do too, but managers tend to have bonus incentives on achieving those metrics, or just the incentive that they get to keep their job. So their metrics, generally when somebody gets to the management level, supervisory or management level, they are really focused on metrics. So we want to make sure that we understand the metrics that are most important to the managers, and then we want to be able to align those metrics with inclusion. So, and I love this little picture of the socks that are lining up. So what does that mean, to align inclusion with metrics? It means that if the metrics are focused on productivity, that we are going to focus our efforts for recruiting and training folks with disabilities on productivity. If safety is the most important aspect of the workplace, we are going to focus on that. We want to make sure that whatever the metrics are, that we are sourcing and supporting people with disabilities to achieve those metrics. I know most of us are involved in this because we care deeply about people with disabilities, and I'm not saying that we're ignoring our interest in them, but to make it successful from the management point of view, we have to make sure that the inclusion is aligning with the metrics. So I want to hammer that, and I'll continue to keep it, it'll be a theme through this whole presentation. So when we talk about managing for performance, that's what managers do all day long. They are trying to get the results that they want. Again, it's more about output than throughput for them. So a lot of managers I've met, and I'm not going to name any names, they tend to be super focused on results and don't spend a lot of time helping people figure out how to achieve those results on an individual level. They look at people as a group. They may have some less than desirable ways to try to motivate people. When I started at Walgreens, I was surprised to find as many managers as I did who use yelling as a motivational technique. And we were able to help them see other ways to motivate their employees. But I do want to make sure that we talk about managing for performance. So next month's webinar is all about performance management. I'm not going to touch on it today, but that is a key, and it's a key to aligning the metrics with the inclusion, and we will make sure that it is covered for an entire hour next month. I call it manipulating success for inclusion. This is what we did at Walgreens. We were very intentional about making sure that we were checking on metrics, that we were making sure that people who were being sourced were qualified and or had the supports and training they needed to be qualified and to achieve those results. So it may seem underhanded or sneaky or something like that, but I think it's all of us need to manipulate the people we're sourcing or supporting in the workplace to be successful, because that's how we get inclusion. So you may be starting out with a whole bunch of bricks, and if you aren't intentional about aligning the skills and the supports of the individual with a disability, you're going to end up with something like this, when what the manager needs is something that looks like this. So we have to be strategic, we have to follow plans, we have to think about this ahead of time, not just slap anybody into a workplace. We've got to think about, what does the company need? I know we spend a lot of time, those of us who are disability advocates, focusing on what the person with a disability need, but it's equally important to be focused on what does the company need and making sure that we're aligning things, making sure that they're matching. Any questions about that? Okay, see, I told you that was the fastest part. Clear communication. So there are lots of communication channels. And what this section is focused on is communicating with managers. So it's generally from the company, but it could also be from the people who are supporting or sourcing those folks with disabilities. Those communication channels can be simple emails or anything on the web as usual, but they could be things in print. Let's not forget that print still exists in some places, no matter how much we work towards digital. And so that can be a very powerful opportunity for communication. And of course, there's always the old-fashioned, let me go talk to you, or use cans with a string. Communication is important, and understanding what a manager's key communication channel is equally as important. I work with managers from various companies, and some of them really want email, some of them really want in person, some of them want a text, some of them want a phone call. I have to keep track of what their preferred communication channel is, and then make sure that what I'm doing with that communication channel is leveraging it for the key important things that need to be conveyed, or the questions that need to be answered. In addition to that, there are lots of other channels, obviously, newsletters, internet, company, blah, blah, blah. The way the office is laid out is a thing, bulletin boards, or those video screens. Boy, I'm aging myself by saying bulletin boards, aren't I? So those video screens that we see in elevators or in cafeterias or other public gathering areas of companies, they are fabulous vehicles for communication about inclusion. But again, thinking about who's your audience, the managers see that. So we want to be focused on what's the messaging that we want to provide to managers. I think the other part that's really important for communication is to be thinking about that you want to listen more than talk. And obviously, I am never a good example of this. I've covered communication in several other webinars, and I always say I'm not the great example of that because I've talked a lot. But it's important when we're talking to managers to listen. We know what we think they're thinking, but we don't know. We want to make sure that we understand what their questions are, what their concerns are. We want to combat those questions and concerns, but we can't do it until we've heard them through, all the way through. And when they say they have a concern, to probe and say, well, tell me more about that. Or how did you come up with that conclusion? Or where did this come from? Where have you seen this before? We really want to be able to pull that information out and be able to say, okay, I understand your issue, your concern, your question, and then be able to answer it. So listening more than talking is key. And it is really hard. When we're passionate about disability inclusion, we're inside our own company, helping them employ more people with disabilities, or we're assisting a company that wants to be more inclusive. We have so many great ideas and we're so excited about this, and it can be hard to shut up. But that's what we need to do. We need to be quiet and let them talk and use silence. They say something that they're concerned about, give them a pause. See if they're going to add something onto them. Or when you ask them a question, make sure that you give them time to respond, to think about it. So again, listening more than talking, I think, is really an important part of communication. The other part, from my perspective, is to ensure continuity. And this is an example I actually have from Walgreens. So when we started, in case you don't know the story of Walgreens, we started with one of our executives had a son on the autism spectrum. And that experience for him made him start thinking about people with disabilities as part of the workforce. And eventually it moved into him wanting to help Walgreens become an excellent employer of people with disabilities. So he was very passionate about inclusion. And he was very passionate about having a flexible perspective as a manager, meaning he wanted people to manage in the gray. He wanted exceptions to be made for people with disabilities when maybe that typically somebody wouldn't be given a second chance on things. So these kinds of ideas about flexibility into managing, to manage in the gray, to maybe give somebody an extra chance because we realize that disability could be the barrier that's preventing them from being successful. Those kind of messages were very supportive, and the idea was great until, because Walgreens is a retail company, we were coming up on the crunch of the holiday season, and everybody gets a lot more stressful during that time because it's important to get the product to the stores. And again, this was from distribution, so we were looking at it through that lens. How do we get the product to the stores? We got to get the trucks out faster. We've got to make sure we're accurate. We've got to be faster. We've got to get things moved. We've got to get things moved. Move. Well, the message up until then was take your time with people with disabilities. Make sure you have time to listen to them. And then it was this crush of get it going. And I had to spend some time with the executive and say, let's think about that message. We're all of a sudden changing our tune. And it's not that you can't change your tune, but you need to be thinking about inclusion during that time. So yes, you want the trucks to move fast, and you want that, but you still want to be able to allow the managers to wrap their heads around how inclusion fits into that. How do we ensure that the supports are being provided to people with disabilities so that they can move. That we can ensure that the trucks are going out on time. What needs to happen from the inclusion perspective? Not that the managers need to do that, but the person myself who was in charge of this initiative, I needed to make sure those supports were in place and to make sure that the managers knew that I understood what they were up against and that I was going to make sure that the inclusion fit with that. So that continuity of messaging, or to get the executive to say, we are going to get these trucks out as fast as possible, but we are still focused on inclusion. Getting that continuity is really important to me. And it turns out it was important to the managers. When we started at Walgreens, we didn't know what was going to be a best practice. We didn't know what was going to make us successful. We tried a lot of things and we figured out what worked and what didn't. So when I do these webinars, I'm talking about what did work and what I've seen replicable for other companies. So although I get a lot of stories about Walgreens, this is actually true in about 6 other companies that I've been working with in the last 2 years. Continuity in their messaging was actually, lack of continuity was interfering in their managers. Lack of continuity in their messaging was interfering with their managers' ability to really be all in, to be on board with the idea of inclusion and to think about how they were managing people with disabilities and doing that in an inclusive way. One of the keys for this kind of communication is to create a safe space. you want to be able to allow people to create or feel empathy, develop their empathy for all of their workers, not just for the workers with disabilities. But if you home in on their workers with disabilities, it actually makes it better for everybody in the workforce. I know we've said that a lot, and I will continue to say that until the day I die. It's really interesting to watch how the humanity of our managers comes out when they are managing people with disabilities, and everybody benefits from that. So you want to create a safe space. Managers need to be able to say what they're thinking, to ask questions, because if they don't ask those questions, they just move on with presumptions. So we want to be able to give them an opportunity to express their doubts or their kind of fanatical concepts of what might be. It's a really important thing. Let people air that out, let them express it, allow them to feel like you are on their side. And that's the key to this. They need to believe that inclusion is there to help them as well, help them be successful managers. So you have to give permission to make mistakes. And this was something that I think our executive at Walgreens did really well. We actually documented all the lessons we learned. And we call them lessons learned instead of mistakes, but that's what they were. We tried something, it didn't give us the results we were hoping for, so then we tried something else. And while all we asked of our managers was to say, oops, I'm sorry, that was a mistake. And then you just fix it and move on. Nobody got beat up for those. Nobody was docked anything. No negative performance indicators were given to an individual because they made a mistake the first time. Now, if they made a mistake over and over again, that's different. But we encouraged people to make mistakes. In fact, if people weren't making mistakes, it meant to our executives that they weren't trying hard enough. So creating that safe bubble to make those mistakes. Managers are used to needing to be accurate and to have everything done to the way it's supposed to be done and all of that. We have to give them room and safety to be able to make those mistakes, to try to motivate an individual based on this. And if it doesn't work, then try it this way. One of the things that I find when we're just talking about disability awareness in general and the language that we like to have be used, inclusive language of people with disabilities instead of disabled people or some of the other things that I've covered in other webinars, managers get concerned that they're going to say the wrong thing. And so they don't say anything, or they just keep it all bent up inside. And again, this is what we want to continue to reinforce to them. This is a safe space. This is a place where you can make a mistake. I'm going to tell you what the mistake was. I'm going to help you fix it. I'm not going to beat you up about it. It was great that you made the mistake. We celebrate mistakes, in fact, because it means you're trying something new to make things better. So I think that's really key. For some managers, they actually had to learn the phrase, I'm sorry, and not feel like that was a bad thing to say. Oops, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. And how to correct it. Not everybody knows how to correct a mistake. So sometimes we have to teach them about how to be able to backpedal a little and then move forward. Everybody has interacted with a person with a disability, but everyone has interacted with a person with a disability. The statistics say there's no way we've been in this country without interacting with a person with a disability. We don't always know that they're a person with a disability, but we all have experience with people with disabilities. So if you can communicate to the managers that this really isn't that different, that they're already managing people with disabilities, this is just a little degree further, helping them realize that is important. And also recognizing that not everybody has a positive experience with people with disabilities. In fact, I'm working with a customer right now where there's a very strong advocate who wants people to do things the right way in the beginning. And so that kind of abrasive attitude is being conveyed to the managers, and they're starting to get nervous. So we need to make sure that that is fixed, that that's really something we can ensure that they have positive experiences, or that we can process with them to be able to change things. I also had a staff person once a long time ago who just was very angry about the barriers that he was experiencing or that he saw. And he kind of took that out on the people who could change those things. So we want to acknowledge that people don't always have a positive experience with people with disabilities. And we want to say, that's okay. Let's figure out what went wrong or how can we help you have a positive experience. So acknowledging that, which I think is really important, and being able to also acknowledge that just because you've an experience with one person with a disability doesn't transfer over to mean it's going to be like that with everybody with a disability. Disability is so broad. We've talked about that also in these webinars. It's such a broad topic, such a broad category, that we really want to be sure to say, just because you've had a mistake with somebody who's blind doesn't mean that you're going to have that same kind of mistake with somebody with a different kind of disability, or that it transfers over. I also have had encounters with managers who have family members with disability, and some of them have family members with very significant disabilities, where honestly, that person is not going to be working in their work environment due to their disability. There just isn't any way to accommodate all of their barriers and have them be successful in the workplace. And that experience for the manager can be very challenging to wrap their heads around. How do people with disabilities be successful when they can't envision how the person with a disability that they know could be successful there? So those are things that I think is important to take when you're communicating with managers, is all of these sorts of things. All right, I will breathe. Any questions or comments about communication? Let's talk about hurdling the stigmas. So this is really the bulk of this. So we acknowledge that all of these things can happen. We acknowledge that there's communications going on about disability, and that we need to align our inclusive efforts with what's important to the managers. Most of those managers do have some stigmas. That's just something across our society, unfortunately, that we still have. A lot of stigma around people with disabilities. And so what I have found across my 15 years of doing this is that information is what is most effective for managers. Giving them information. Managers kind of thrive on data and numbers and results. And so being able to give them that information or experiences that they can relate to be able to ensure that we can shift their mindset through information. So giving them answers and information is key. I actually offer a disability awareness fast track program. It's about a 40-minute course broken down into answering 6 questions. And this is what the 6 questions are for this disability awareness course. Why is this a big deal? What is a disability? How am I supposed to act? Are there rules I need to follow? What am I allowed to say? And let's see that last one. I'm not finding pictures of them. And hold, please.
What else I need to know?
Thank you. What else do I need to know? That's my catch-all category. But I framed each one of these questions like this. This is the questions I hear. It's not, tell me about people who use wheelchairs, or how do I talk to somebody who's blind? It's, how am I going to mess up? Why is this important? Who are we talking about? So this disability awareness course is framed in that way. You can get disability awareness from a lot of different sources. It doesn't have to be from me. But make sure that the questions that your folks have are being answered in those disability awareness trainings. I think it's also important to talk a lot about performance versus potential, because the way our employment systems are set up right now, we assume people have had success and that's why we're putting them into the job. But the reality is that even every job I've ever applied for, I never really had experience doing it before. I just knew that I could and was able to communicate that potential. But it's not necessarily that easy with people with disabilities. And so, especially if managers are involved in interviewing candidates with disabilities, we have to work with them about performance versus potential. People don't have the demonstrated experience to show performance yet because of their disability, but their potential is there because we're supporting them, or we are bringing in the people who are supporting them. If an individual with a disability isn't qualified for a position, they should be coming either with training or a coach or something that will help them get there to that qualified perspective or qualification. That's so to say. Anyway, that the performance of their past isn't necessarily an indicator of their potential. That said, once somebody's in a manager's space and they are managing them, if people don't start to perform, then we do have to question the potential. And we have to listen to the manager's concerns about potential. Are there concerns based on some experience with this individual, or is it based on experience with others with disabilities, or 1 week's worth of performance, which really isn't a great way to judge people. So having that conversation, I think, is just one of the ways to help people get past stigma. Giving them examples. If they haven't had any experiences yet, you can share with them when people didn't look like they had the potential and they did. And telling managers about what happened with those individuals, what kind of supports did they leverage that allowed them to be successful, that promoted them to be successful. Talking about the difference between performance and potential is a way to really help a manager open up their mind and see the possibilities that we're talking about and be able to be more open-minded in their approach to individuals. So again, easing their minds about performance is one really important part of this. And actually, I think it's the most important part of helping managers be inclusive managers, to make sure that we've got an inclusive work environment, because the managers are driving it, not because HR is driving it, or not because just some executive as a champion is driving this. We want it to be driven by the business's needs, which are performance. So we want to make sure that when we design these kinds of programs, or when we've got folks with disabilities already in there, that they're being held accountable just like everybody else is. Now, I don't want you to go and hold people with disabilities accountable for performance if nobody else is being held accountable for their performance, but to be consistent across that, to make sure that people with disabilities are being held to the same standards, not higher, not lower. I was at a meeting once with an agency that serves people with disabilities, and they were trying to create a relationship with this business. And they were saying, well, that's, you're going to make sure that our folks only are held to 60% of whatever everybody else is held to, because they have disabilities. And I said, wait a minute, that is not acceptable. If you're supporting people with disabilities, you're supporting them to be successful in the jobs that we have. We're not creating jobs for you. And that was really a pivotal moment in my career, where I just said, if you don't want to talk about actual performance the way we define it, then we're done with this meeting. There's no point in moving forward, because I'm not here to say people with disabilities can only achieve less. I'm here to say that I know that they can achieve the same as everybody else. The question is, how are we going to get them there? And I'll have that conversation all day long with any agency or advocate for people with disabilities. But if people come out saying people with disabilities can't earn that, can't achieve that, I'm done talking to them, because I've seen so many people with disabilities being successful in ways that we didn't think they were going to be. And it's because we expected them to perform to the standards that we had set for everybody else. We believed that they had the potential to achieve that, and they did. So I think when I started at Walgreens, I've told this story many times, I didn't believe that the people with disabilities could do the jobs that we had at Walgreens. I thought, oh, well, this isn't going to really work, but I need a job, so I'm just going to hang out as long as I can and try to make sure that I can do the best that I can. And when I was just blown away by the results that we saw of folks with disabilities day after day, they improved, they got up to the level of standards that we needed them to be at, they exceeded those standards. It was incredible, not just in productivity, but in safety and in attendance, in their loyalty to the company, to their decision to participate in the 401k plan that we had, to their volunteering, just like all the rest of the employees, to go help assist in the Special Olympics event in the local community. And then watching the folks who are arranging that event try to say to the individuals with disabilities, oh no, you're an athlete, you go over there. And they say, no, I'm here to be a volunteer with the rest of my coworkers. That potential is there, and we have to believe in it. So we need to make sure that the managers know we expect that. And we want to make sure that they're clear that our program that we're designing, the people with disabilities that we're bringing into their facility, are going to be doing the same performance as everybody else. Now, if the rest of the workforce is not performing well, maybe we'll say, hey, people with disabilities are probably going to be better. We can't promise that. But just to say, we want to make sure that the folks with disabilities are at least as good as the rest of the folks in the workforce. And as you all know, because most of the people that are in the, not a lot of people who are already in the workforce are people with disabilities, but not disabilities ones. So at Walgreens, the key was to continue to adjust the model until it worked. Like I said, it took us a long time to figure it out. We were really focused on making sure that this was successful for the business, for the folks with disabilities, and for the community as a whole. So we had two mantras. One was same job, same pay, same standards, same benefits, side by side, meaning that we were having people with disabilities do the same tasks in the same environment as everybody else and receiving the same pay. The other mantra that we had was this needed to be fair for all, the customers, the shareholders, and the employees, those with and without disabilities. So within that framework, we adjusted things left and right, up and down, forwards and backwards, until we figured out how to do this well in that distribution center. And then we took those lessons learned and applied them to other distribution centers, adjusted in each one of those for the individual characteristics of the community or the leadership or the hiring patterns of that building. And that's what I took to retail. When we went from distribution to the stores are very different. They operate differently. They have very different dynamics. They have different pay structures. They got different kinds of jobs, different management structures. All of that was different. And I had to adjust the whole model to make sure that it worked within the context of customers, shareholders, and employees, and it was creating success there. So that's how you do inclusive management success, is you make sure that you are tuning everything together to run along the perspective of the business. Unfortunately, most of our country is conditioned to have low expectations. The media feeds into this all day long. And we are now, because of the pandemic, we have been inundated with media. And there's just not a lot of media out there that shows the true potential and experience of people with disabilities. There's getting to be some more, but we still get these over-sensationalized news stories about, oh, this school had one student with a disability who got to be their mascot or their manager of the basketball team. And then towards the end of the season, they were allowed to go in for a minute and shoot the winning basket or whatever it is. That's just not real inclusion from my perspective. Why wasn't this student included in the team the whole time? If they didn't have the skill set, then why were they being allowed to go throw that last basket in there at the end? Would anybody in the stands had that opportunity? No, it's taking this person with a disability and treating them really differently. And in sort of a sensationalized way to get the media to cover the story. It makes it seem, for those of us who are watching the media stories, wow, this person did something so ordinary and everybody's treating it like it's extraordinary. And that's challenging for me. I used to have a friend who used a wheelchair, and we would go out to dinner and we'd be seated at the table in the restaurant, and somebody would come up and pat her on the head or pat her on the shoulder and say, oh, good for you getting out of here and coming outside and having a meal in the restaurant. Good for you. And I was like, wow, why is it good for her, not for me? Aren't you impressed with the fact that I'm there too? I mean, no, again, it's not about me. But the point is, they thought that her getting up, getting dressed, and going to a restaurant was extraordinary. To her, it was ordinary. Now, what was extraordinary was that she was an amazing athlete and that she was an Olympian, a Paralympian, and she achieved gold twice. So that's what's incredible, this incredible athletic performance on her part, not because she got dressed and went out of the house and went to a restaurant. So again, realizing that we've been conditioned to have very low expectations of people with disabilities, and we should raise those expectations. Again, that's what happened at Walgreens. We believe they had the potential to do it, and it turns out they did. Raise those expectations. People with disabilities will meet them all day long. And if they're challenged to meet those expectations, then we want to make sure that they've got the supports they need to achieve them. All right. Before I get into the activities that we can do with managers to help them get past their stigmas or their bias, I want to just pause for a second. Does anybody have questions or thoughts about what I've presented so far? It's not usual I take a pause. Nothing? Okay, great. Excellent. Don't forget, you can raise your hand or hop into the chat if you've got a question or a comment. So there are a lot of group activities that you can do, or you can arrange or coordinate to help managers have a little bit better sense of what inclusive management is like. I have a list on a piece of paper that will go along with the replay of this webinar, but I want to talk about a few of them. So there are group activities that a lot of people promote or will facilitate for managers specifically. A lot of them are focused on disability awareness and disability etiquette. Those are nice. And again, try to frame it in the ways that the people are asking questions, like in my course. But I think the other thing is to give them experiences with people with disabilities in less intimidating environments. So a lot of the companies that I work with, we take their managers on a tour of another facility that is inclusive of people with disabilities. Walgreens opens their doors, UPS opens their doors, Sephora opens their doors. There's a lot of companies out there that are already doing inclusion and are so excited about how they do it that they want to share that with everybody else, because that was what happened for them. It was shared to them. They had the opportunity. In the beginning, it was Walgreens was the only place to go. You could come and you could see a very fast-paced, sort of dangerous, because it's a distribution center environment where people are achieving the standards and people with obvious disabilities are doing it. Before Walgreens, we actually went to a place called Habitat, not Habitat for Humanity, but Habitat. It's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where they manufacture all sorts of different products. The time we were there, they were manufacturing that indoor-outdoor carpeting that looks like a golf green kind of thing. And they had set up their business to employ a lot of people with barriers, predominantly people with disabilities, but lots of other barriers, which is where we got to learn about that. And so they gave us the opportunity to come and see it and actually spend time on the work floor and interact with the employees with disabilities. They felt their purpose of their company was not only to employ people with disabilities, but also to share that experience with other companies. They were just a wonderful, wonderful company that somebody wrote a book about them, and it's called Able. So if you have a chance to get that book, it's a great book. Able is a wonderful story about how the company decided to do this and all the success that they achieved with that. But Habitat was nice enough to open their doors. When Walgreens started, we opened our doors. Now I know all the companies that have learned from Walgreens are opening their doors. So if your managers are hesitant, give them an opportunity to see, what does inclusion look like? Being able to talk to another manager, even if it's in a competitive company, to say, how is this really working? How's it going? Those kind of group activities are really important. And I think that's the best way that we can help managers see, how is this going to work? Because in their head, they got all these questions, and we want to get those questions out. Again, we want to be able to listen and have them tell us, what are their concerns? What are their hesitations? What are their fears? So one of those activities that I did at Walgreens, and actually now replicated for many of my clients, is called What If? It started out as we just needed some time to kill, and I thought, well, here's a nice, let's try this. Now we know it works. We replicate it, we use it with everybody. What if? You get a bunch of managers into a room, you kick the upper management out of there, because again, you want to create a safe space, and you give them a piece of paper, a bunch of pieces of paper and a pen, and you say, just write down. You now know that you're going to employ more people with disabilities in your department. What are your fears? Start a question with, what if, and then list your fears. And we got amazing examples of what people are really thinking. These are people who knew they were going to be working in a facility whose focus was to employ people with disabilities. And they had these fears and concerns. So if they did, everybody else is. What if the people climb up on the conveyor belts? What if they run away? What if they're bullied? What if someone takes advantage of them? What if I don't know how to talk to them? And it goes on from there. And it was really a wonderful experience to be able to hear their concerns and their questions and respond to them. So when we were talking about what if somebody takes advantage of what if another employee takes advantage of a person with a disability? The answer was, well, what do we do when an employee without a disability is in that scenario? And we know one employee is taking advantage of another employee. What do our policies say? It really helped our managers realize that our policies are designed for people with disabilities as well as people without disabilities, and that we can apply the same standards and the same policies. So that's just one example of the group activities, but I have a list here that y'all can pull up when the email comes. I think tactics are very important. We used to spend a lot of time saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. What do we tell them what to do? So I have a couple of those to bring forward. the first one is about how do you greet a person with a disability? Do you need to yell at them? Maybe they can't hear you because maybe they're deaf. No, you just use the same tone of voice. One of my key examples to give people is to say, now, if you ever meet a person who's missing a hand and you extend your hand to shake their hand, what do? All of a sudden you realize, oh, they don't have a hand. And to talk them through what you do with that situation so that they feel comfortable, they feel prepared for that. John Robinson from Our Ability in New York has some really great videos with examples of that. So I encourage you to check out those videos. I'm sorry, Becca, I didn't give you the link for that. I will send it in the notes. It just occurred to me. He does a great job with that. And also to intentionally choose your focus. We are curious beings, and we tend to have these kind of like, oh, well, what's that? Or what's that? So we had a HR manager who used a wheelchair, and I actually had people whisper to me, how does she go to the bathroom? Now, that's a completely inappropriate question to ask about anybody, much less a person with a disability and your colleague. However, that was what was in their head. So I wanted to recognize that and help them think about something else. Focus on her abilities, focus on those things. How do you deal with those questions that you've got? Everybody's got those questions. So let's talk about them, get them so they can focus on the things we want them to focus on. And my favorite, the person at Walgreens who came in after me actually made an acronym, ATP, ask the person. What I hear all day long from people is, well, what if I need to help them? Or what if I don't know how to help them? Or what if I don't know how to talk to them? You know what? You have to ask that person. If you want to understand how to work well with somebody, you ask them. You ask them, I see you having struggles with the door. How can I help you with that? Or we're at lunch and I see you struggling to turn the tab on your soda can. Can I help you with that? And if so, how do you want me to help you with that? Asking those questions, not being intimidated to ask questions, I think is really important. I think it's helpful to curate resources. Now I see most companies have somewhere in their HR or their employee supports services section of their intranet fact sheets and links to videos and other helpful tips on how to help people with disabilities. So I encourage you, the ones that you find to be useful or you hear from other people are useful, just curate them all into a folder so that people can access them or you can refer folks to them. So what have you tried? What ifs do you have? And what do you anticipate are managers' concerns? And I'm going to be quiet, see if anybody types in the chat.
So we do have a private chat question around, I think it triggered the asking inappropriate questions. So how do you encourage people to ask questions, but ask the appropriate ones? I think that's the interpretation.
So, and that's a very good, I should have provided more clarity to that. So as an individual who's coordinating the efforts, disability inclusion efforts, you need to present yourself as the safe place. So, and acknowledge that people are going to have inappropriate questions. You don't want them to ask that question to the person with a disability. You want them to have a place, you're kind of like the soft pillow where they can land and lob that question in there, and you can help them just think about refocusing. Sometimes you answer the question, sometimes you don't, because sometimes really, truly, it is none of their business. But you say that in a nice way. You provide empathy for the fact that they have the question, that they have these fears and concerns. Help them realize that this is normal for all of us, who it's something new, we're not familiar with it. That's how we react to things that are new. But here's the line in the sand, yeah, don't go ask that question because you wouldn't ask anybody else that question. But let's think about how to frame that. So you become kind of that buffer. I think buffer is the right word for it. Okay, great. All right. So, on time, this is great. So just a real quick recap of all of the webinars in case you haven't all signed up for every one of them, because not all of you have, and that's okay. But they're all available on the ones that have already been provided. The replays are available on the website. And every time you get the email with the recorded webinar, the link that you go to actually shows you where all of the recordings are. So we have done a lot of webinars. We are in September now. So we already had the webinars focused on why do you employ people with disabilities? How do you employ people with disabilities? What do you need to do to employ people with disabilities? And then we covered etiquette and accommodations. We talked about self-identification and disclosure, and really the strategies that are built around those. And then the last two webinars were about sourcing and hiring either out into the community or through direct partnerships with agencies that serve people with disabilities. So all of those topics are key to building a disability inclusion strategy in your company. Today, obviously, we're talking about managing people with disabilities, and in October, we will focus solely on performance management, meaning how do you help the managers get the performance they're looking for out of the workers, and how do you manage people that can't achieve those? That is one of the biggest questions I get. Well, can I fire people with disabilities? Sure, as long as you fire them the same way you fire everybody else. So we're going to get into that. It's going to get kind of nitty and gritty in the October webinar. And then November and December, just to have a little bit lighter topics, we're going to talk about growing disability inclusive culture in your facility, no matter what you are, where you are, what you're doing, what your level of inclusion is at that point in time. And then on December, I want to recognize that a lot of companies have exerted a lot of effort in this way, and maybe they need to refresh their effort. And so this is actually somebody from a very established and well-known successful company that is including a lot of people with disabilities reached out to me and said, that's the webinar I want. I need to know how to refresh this. A lot of these initiatives get handed off to somebody else who wasn't necessarily there in the beginning, and there's some tribal knowledge that gets lost, and they just need to be able to reset and start moving forward. So I know that Becca has put the link to those webinars in there. You have to register for each one individually. Unfortunately, you can't register for the series. I couldn't figure out how to do that. I'm not a tech wizard. But again, if you go to that link, you'll also be able to see the replays that are already up there. And again, I'll get the September replay as soon as I can, but I'm promising Monday to be emailed out to you. What questions do y'all have that I haven't answered so far? We got 7 minutes. Nothing? Okay. Well, then I will actually let you all go and let you go a little bit early so that you can go and attend to everything else that's been pinging into your inbox.
Just really quick, Deb, we did have a question. Did I hear the time of the rest of the webinars has changed?
So yeah, yes, and I'll be sending an email out to that. I apologize, I had to change the time for this one. And the reason I had to change the time for this one was that I was scheduled for a very important and regular call during the time slot of 1 to 2 Eastern, so on Thursdays. So I will be sending out an email to everybody who's registered and everybody on the list actually who has tended to come to register for some of these to say, these are now going to be at noon instead of 1 Eastern time on the same Thursday, second Thursday of the month. But we also realized that the November one is scheduled for Veterans Day, so I will be changing that day as well because we want to recognize and honor the fact that a lot of people have that day off for a very important reason. We don't want to get them tied up in having to attend a webinar if they're going to do it in person. So we will send out the information and make sure it's posted on the website as well to keep it going. So thanks for asking that question.
Great. All right, thank you, Deb. What a great day.
This was a great day. I really appreciate everybody's attention to this, and it was a little quiet in the chat, but that's fine. I recognize that I talk a lot, so sometimes it's hard to get a word in edgewise, and sometimes I answer your questions for you, a chance to take it in. So thank you, Becca. As always, you are my sidekick and have done such a great job this whole time. I really appreciate the partnership with Human Service
Glad
Forum.
to do it.
Thank you to the participants who are here live, and thank you to anybody who's going to be watching this on a replay. Just remember, it's not as hard as we think it is. We just have to have some intention and some strategy. Thanks, everybody.